The best Final Fantasy game ever is... Okay, let's talk about it. You've seen the title, you've clicked on the video. What is the best Final Fantasy game ever? Now, I go by the name of Mr. Midas and welcome to my channel. If you're brand new, please hit that subscribe. We're trying to hit 1K by the end of September. But forget all of that, that's not why you're here. We're here to discuss one of the greatest RPG series ever made, Final Fantasy. Now, when I platinum Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I started pondering what is the greatest Final Fantasy game ever made. And if you haven't seen my first video, check the index card and watch that first, because that's when we start speaking about my introduction into the series. So we're not going to be a no lay, no long thing. We're going to go straight in and continue from where we left off and talk about Final Fantasy 15. So Final Fantasy 15 is probably one of the biggest gaming mishaps of our generation. Final Fantasy 15 was originally announced back in May 2016 for the PS3 and was entitled Final Fantasy Versus 13. The trailer was shown at E3 and blew everyone's mind. The music, the dark atmosphere, and the game's protagonist that we now know as Noctis looked incredible, moody, just sitting on a throne, and then he walks down with his multiple swords a la Cloud in Advent Children, and then the fighting mechanics just look so sick. And Noctis disappears and reappears with some spectacular hype levels, was just out the roof, like everyone was fully gassed. But like I said, development FF13 Versus got scrapped in 2012 and the game was changed to Final Fantasy 15 with a new production team keeping the main pro tag but completely changing the story. FF15 released 10 years later on both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and sold incredibly well. We're talking 8.9 million units, which is like top tier sales for a Final Fantasy game. Not only did FF15 have 10 years to combat with, Square also decided to change the fighting mechanics from turn-based to real-time combat from what people are used to in the other Final Fantasy series. Now, Final Fantasy 15 was a good game. The story around Noctis, Prompto, Ignis and Gladius was okay. The open world segments were fun, and although the combat was kinda janky, it was refreshing for a change. This game had major problems, like the story gets really messed up around the end and felt super rushed. Square since have added DLC and they've changed the last chapter to kind of make people more happy, and it's probably the best addition right now. But me personally, I did enjoy it. Final Fantasy 15 is one of the few games that I have platinum, so I enjoyed my time with it, but it could never be a top tier Final Fantasy game because I just feel like it was a lot of a testing ground, and a lot of stuff that was done in it was a test for Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Get going. Now, Final Fantasy 7 Remake is a new game inspired by the juggernaut, which is Final Fantasy 7. Now, big man ting, this game is everything to me. Final Fantasy 7 is the game that I always honor as the title that made me a hardcore gamer. And this remake, whoa, spice. Soon as I saw the remake's opening sequence, my heart sank. And that statement really sums up this game for me. A magical reimagining of a game that means everything to me, and Square did the damn thing. We now have a beautiful, like stunning world with colours that pop, NPCs who are living out their lives, and to see my favourite gaming characters in all 4K glory, whoa, spectacular. Cloud Strife is beyond iconic, and although we reference the original game a lot, Final Fantasy 7 Remake is a new title in itself. It's basically redoing an old idea, but it has so much of its own. It does an amazing job fleshing out our main character stories, but it also really opened up the stories of some of the side characters, like Jesse, for example. Jesse was just like a side piece in original Final Fantasy, but the way they really go into a story with her family and visiting her home and her dad, this game is a lot to me. And yo, we have to mention how cold the fighting mechanics are in Final Fantasy 7 Remake. They are so sick. It's probably the best real-time combat I've ever played in a JRPG. The game mixes real-time action with options for you to choose your magic and special attacks via a menu. And the combat is fast-paced, colourful, dramatic, and at times it can be challenging. And you can take control of all your characters. So, as you can tell, I love Final Fantasy 7 Remake, but I can't make it the best Final Fantasy game just because it's not a complete tale. Final Fantasy 7 Remake is a part tale of the Final Fantasy 7 game. Now, it's a game on its own right, and I hate when people say it's not. It is a full Final Fantasy game, but it just does not tell the full story of Final Fantasy 7. So I can't give it the best. As much as I really want to, I can't. So, there's only two titles that it can be. OG Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy 10. And I love both of these games. Oh my god. Oh, this is so hard. I'm not gonna lie, this is a proper difficult decision. Like, Tidus, such a sick pro tag, but then Cloud is just iconic. And Tifa and Aerith, they're like the most lovable characters. But then, come on, Yuna. And the music in Final Fantasy 7, but the music in Final Fantasy 10. Oh. And the story on both of these tales are completely epic. All right, give me a moment. I have to decide. Okay, all right. I think I know what's the best Final Fantasy game ever, all right? The best Final Fantasy game ever is Final Fantasy 7. Gotta be OG Final Fantasy 7. This is the most iconic, one of the most iconic games ever. Now, I love Final Fantasy 10, but the one thing I hate about Final Fantasy 10 is the end part of the story. I hate how the story finishes. Like, I think it's stupid and it spoiled that part of the game for me. And there's nothing that spoils FF7 for me, other than maybe how the graphics look nowadays, but that whole journey is complete. And it's complete and it's incredible. And it's the best Final Fantasy game ever. This game is iconic. It changed video games. Like, it changed gaming. It changed Square. And I don't even think Square Enix would be the Square Enix they are without OG FF7. So let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you say OG Final Fantasy 7 is the best? I know some of you still screaming FF8. It's not the best. I don't care what you say, fam. It's not the best one. But tell me in the comments what you think is the greatest. Now, disclaimer, Final Fantasy 7 is the first Final Fantasy game I've played. I've never played anything before. So if you think 1 to 6 are better, tell me below why they're so great and why I should play it. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for staying to the end of the video. You are the MVP. Make sure you give this video a like if you enjoyed it. And please, if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and tell a friend to tell a friend about Mr. Midas. I'm in MrMidasGames and this is it. The trilogy's done. And you now know what's the best Final Fantasy game ever. I'm out.